I am Minotaur Interview. Good morning and welcome, my fellow New Year's nerds. It is I, the OGGM, broadcasting live from Site B here in sunny Southern California. And I am very excited today to be joined by a Minotaur. So, Paul, you're a Minotaur. This is Paul from I Am Minotaur Clever Recluse Games. Paul, tell us about yourself and your secret tabletop role-playing game origin, please.
Wow. I don't know if I have a secret tabletop role-playing game origin, but I've been playing since I was like, oh my gosh, like 9 or 10. And I am unfortunately much older than that now. I started with Redbox, basic Dungeons and Dragons, and played some Warhammer, fantasy role-playing game, Call of Cthulhu, Paranoia, just all the classics like in the 80s and 90s. Got away from it, played computer games for a long time, and came back into it about 10 years ago. It's just been, it's such an amazing niche of the hobby. I'm so lucky to be here. And I've been working on my game, on this game, I Am Minotaur, since 1989. So it is, yeah, it's this awesome grognard, like old school role-playing game where everybody's a Minotaur.
Everybody's a Minotaur.
Everybody is. Every character is a Minotaur in this game. There aren't even any rules for any other types of any other races. Everybody's got to be a Minotaur in this one.
All the good guys are Minotaurs. All the bad guys are Minotaurs.
Well, it's kind of interesting. There's been all this controversy about races and, good versus evil races in 5e Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes.
And this game, there is no real good or evil. You don't get to pick that like at the beginning of the game. You pick character traits and you kind of play with those.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. So it's kind of subjective. I mean, there are some really great things about Minotaurs and Minotaur society, and then there's some really horrible things about Minotaur society that I personally would not want to live under.
The constant threat of being barbecued, of course.
Well, yeah, to an extent. It's kind of funny that you say that as a joke, but I mean, they have honor duels. The Minotaurs have honor duels. You can be walking down the street as a Minotaur and accidentally brush against another Minotaur, and you find yourself in a fight to the death, which doesn't appeal to me personally.
But that's the story. So what is the brainchild behind a all Minotaur role-playing game, and why are you kickstarting it now if you started it in the 80s?
I finally finished it. It's taken me years to get to the point.
Almost
I'm
40,
a perfectionist.
Yeah.
What's that?
Almost 40 years, yeah.
Yeah, embarrassing. But yeah, I just finally have gotten it to the point where I didn't feel, it started out as a Dungeons and Dragons clone, where, it was just all the stuff I didn't like about Dungeons and Dragons. I removed that and then kept all the stuff I did like. And I think that's kind of a common tactic among gamers. But I kept asking myself, I'm like, what does this game bring to the table that like other D&D clones don't? And I couldn't answer that question for 40 years, for a long time. And finally, somebody came to me with, well, no, what happened was there was a game that fell through, and it was a Star Trek game. And I said, well, why don't we treat D&D races like we do Star Trek? I kind of feel like Dungeons and Dragons right now is more like Star Wars. You kind of go into the cantina. What's that?
I understand. Like one planet is all race X, one planet is all race I, and there's not that cross pollination like you see in Star Wars. Like in this episode, you're only going to run into the brick people, right?
Yeah, exactly. And in Star Wars, I'm sure if you really delve deep into the lore, you can find a lot of information on the aliens and everything else. But it's not at the surface level. Like if you go see like Star Wars, the first Star Wars, A New Hope, you're not going to learn too much about the Tusken Raiders. You're not going to learn too much about any of the other aliens featured in there. Yeah. And with Star Trek, you go and you see a Star Trek movie, and if an alien race is featured in there, you learn a lot about that race, and you learn what the positive traits are, what the negative traits are, and everything else. And so I thought it would be interesting to kind of get that going with a fantasy, because I didn't really see that being done.
Yeah.
And I picked Minotaurs because Minotaurs are super cool.
Yeah. Why have all the different hodgepodge of races did you choose bipedal cows?
You know, I think there's so much good backstory there. There's so much interesting background there. There's a lot of inspiration. Kryn, obviously, Margaret Weiss. There was a whole. It's interesting because they were neutral during the War of the Lands, but there was a whole race of Minotaurs. The Kryn Minotaurs are really interesting, and you have Richard A. Canuck. And he did some really interesting stuff with Minotaurs. And so I felt that there was a big fertile field there that just hadn't been examined, hadn't been furrowed. And I thought it would be really cool to explore that.
Cool. So talk us through the game. You sent me a copy, but it got a little chopped up.
Oh dear. How'd that happen?
The magic of the internet.
Okay. Maybe I made have. Okay. Well, let's see. I watched
a little of your video, so you talk a little bit about the stats. So how do you how is your game different than every other D20 retro clone, especially like when you get to I'm playing a Minotaur.
Right.
What differentiates my miniature from every other Minotaur?
Well, first of all, it's not a D20.
Okay.
That's the biggest thing. It's a percentile based game.
Percentile is always good.
Yeah. People who have played it say that it reminds them of Warhammer, Call of Cthulhu, and World of Darkness, kind of like all fused into one game. And if that's true, that's great. That's a great pedigree.
Yeah, I mean, being compared to Call of Cthulhu alone, yeah.
Yeah. I love those. I love Call of Cthulhu. I follow Sandy Peterson on Twitter. Absolutely, or the company does. It's random roll, and as we know, if you work with a percentile dice, they can be very swingy. You can get like a 0-1 and then 100 and blah blah blah. But what the system does to try and mitigate that to an extent is for traits that the Minotaur is considered to be very good at, or probably has a proficiency in, like say if your Minotaurs would have a high fitness, you would roll 3 times, and then you pick the highest number and you add 20 to it, and that would be the Minotaur's fitness. Meanwhile, say worldliness, which is book smarts, Minotaur society does not accentuate book smarts. Minotaurs are not stupid, it's not that dumb, bestial, I'm just gonna, can barely speak common type of Minotaur like you get in D&D. There are Minotaur sorcerers, et cetera, et cetera. But you roll once, and that's it. So you can get, like, say, a 10 worldliness. You can get a 100 worldliness. But what even makes it better is you can take on a flaw. And a flaw is a weakness that the Minotaur has. Like, say the Minotaur can be afraid of fire or something like that. And in which case you get a reroll of those traits, of those statistics.
No, okay. So each time you take a flaw, you can reroll them?
Yes, you can reroll 1. And you can only take 2 flaws, I believe. But yeah, it usually guarantees at least a playable character, although you don't get that point by, like, I'm a mega character, I know how to game the system. You don't get that, unfortunately. Well, or fortunately, because I don't like to play that way personally.
No, fortunately, yeah. It should be more individual characters than just point by.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. With point by, I find that everything becomes static after a while. Everybody chooses the same skills. Everybody gets pushes the same attributes, and the characters all kind of mush together.
Yes. Random is best. Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Cool. So you've gone for some different words here, and it looks like you've got your classes. What differentiates each Minotaur in a world of all Minotaurs? What inspires a Minotaur to go out and adventure?
What inspires a Minotaur to go out and adventure? Well, the Minotaur, you have a dying Minotaur empire. You have 2 cities. The campaign world, I should also add, the campaign world is fused into the rule set. There aren't a whole bunch of different campaign worlds. And, there are positives and negatives to that approach. I think it's going to be easier for new players and new GMs.
To have a
And you can,
pre-generated,
I'm sorry?
to have a pre-made world just sitting there for them.
Basically. Yeah.
Oh, totally. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also what you can do is make the careers a lot more specific. If you have a priest that is like of a certain god, you can give bonuses and negatives and design spells because that god is going to be used in that campaign. And we did take that approach. So you have very different, wildly different gods that the Minotaurs worship, and they all have different abilities. And that makes for something that's interesting too.
Okay, sure. Tell us about how that's different than your typical fantasy game.
Well, for instance, there is the priest of FLGS, which is the god of greed. And we use gods that were analogous to Greek gods, but aren't one-for-one copies. We have a god that's analogous to Ares. We have a god that's kind of analogous to Zeus, all that. But they aren't one-for-one. So you don't have all that Greek, all those Greek mythos kind of weighing you down as a GM. You can kind of come up with different things. You're not forced to be like, okay, this is Athena, so I have to do X, Y, Z.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So religion plays an important part in the world.
Yes, Minotaurs are very religious, and meanwhile, their adversaries, the elves, not so much.
Okay, so there are other races, just not other player character races.
That's correct. There are other races. There just are no PC races. As a matter of fact, humans are listed as a monster in the.
Some would say they are.
and it says they're untrustworthy, and you've got to be careful with them at all times. Basically, is how it says.
So how do you hardwire that into the game if somebody says, "But I want to be an elf" or whatever?
The game is just the game. This is a game that may not be for everybody.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. And I think that's Dungeons and Dragons' problem right now, is that it's trying to be a game for everybody. And it's, it unfortunately, there are some people who are getting very upset because when you have a game for everybody, a lot of times it ends up being for nobody.
Exactly. And everybody's special. Nobody's special.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a great time to be a independent role-playing game creator, coming off of the amazing year that independent people had last year with 2024, tabletop role-playing game of the year, being that little engine that is Shadow Dark. What are your plans for the Minotaur invasion? You got a Kickstarter that's about to go live, it looks like.
Yes, that's correct. In the next month or two, it's going to go live. A lot's going to depend on that Kickstarter. Really, it's going to be almost all for art and editing. I'm probably open hands here. I probably will see very little money from that Kickstarter. It's going to go all the artists.
Yeah.
We have some really exciting artists. I don't feel comfortable naming them just yet because we don't have the money to get them, and I don't want them to feel obligated. But there are amazing artists that I'm super excited to be working with if this Kickstarter happens. It's going to be phenomenal. Unfortunately, if it doesn't go through, the game will still get made. But it may have to use AI art, which would be a bit of a bummer.
There's a lot of public domain, Minotaur art out there too. that you can
Yeah.
use. I'm sure,
Yep.
history and
Absolutely.
museums are filled with them. So you could just, probably wouldn't get too much trouble if you use some of the actual Minotaur stuff, I'm sure. How close to the actual Minotaur mythology, Greek mythology, is it? I mean,
it's fairly close, really. As I said, the gods are going to be different, but we use the Greek names for the weapons. We use the spatha instead of the sword. So we're using that. We some of the names are kind of bastardized Greek, if I could say. I took like some elements from the Greek word and kind of transferred it over. But yeah, I mean, it's silver, bronze age, stuff. There isn't a whole lot of steel lying around. The big debate is whether we have medieval style steel armor, because that is what people are expecting, or we don't. But armor's rare, in especially at lower levels. It's really expensive.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, there are a lot of people running around, and I could look it up and with just shields and pelta shields and spathas. So there's definitely some of that going on.
Cool. So you definitely did your research, it sounds like.
Yeah, it was so much fun just learning all that stuff. One thing, if I can totally geek out, is ship combat is so cool and fun in I Am Minotaur because they didn't have cannons. So instead, they had huge catapults, ballista and catapults, just firing stuff from these ships, and they had these gigantic crossbows, or they do in I Am Minotaur. They have these huge gigantic crossbows that take like 10 Minotaurs to load, and then you go and they kind of ratchet them around and boom, and they fire. It's just a unique experience.
Okay, cool. Considering it is one of the many word of the week, have you had anybody come after you for the dreaded racial appropriation? I mean, are you really from Greece? Because that still seems to be going around.
I mean, no, I'm not. I'm not from Greece, actually.
Are you really a Minotaur? No.
Really a Minotaur? No.
How can you speak for the Minotaur people if you're not a Minotaur?
When it comes to diversity, I will say something on that. I think we have a very diverse team. I'm fortunate enough to have a very diverse team here, and there are some questionable things, or things that would be considered questionable by some people in I Am Minotaur. There are certain types of slavery from I Am Minotaur, but it's not. It's not anything analogous to what the United States went through. And there was a debate as to whether to include it or not. And I felt it was important just to, first of all, it's important for characters to make that choice and players to make that choice. Do they turn a blind eye to what's going on, or do they not? And it is kind of this blood debt type of thing that's going on. It's not, again, anything like what happened in the United States.
Cool. Because inevitably, that's probably something game designers have to be concerned of, is the cancel culture, which fortunately seems to be dying out.
Yeah, I mean, I understand. I think I see both sides of it. I think that both sides can go too far.
Yes.
There are some situations where I've been in games where I found certain things distasteful, and it was obviously done to direct to somebody, and I think that's wrong. I think that's evil, quite frankly. I think we should be an inclusive hobby.
Yes.
On the other hand, I don't agree with complete total censorship of subjects or anything even around those subjects.
Cool. That's good to know. Cool. Cool. So what's a typical Minotaur adventure like in I Am Minotaur? You know,
It's interesting. Our first minute, we are running one, excuse me, at conventions. And what the most striking thing about it is not a typical dungeon crawl. When you first play, you generally don't attack for the first 30 minutes. You don't get into combat for the first 30 minutes. And generally, it's trying to avoid combat. Minotaurs have a horrible temper, and they actually can go berserk. And it's handled in a way that's almost that's somewhat close to like sanity in Call of Cthulhu. And and the more stressors your character's under, the more difficult it is to make those rolls to keep your cool. But the problem is, if you lose your temper, a lot of the time, especially at low levels, it's death. If you lose your temper in a Minotaur town, in a Minotaur city in your first level, and there's a bunch of 10th level Minotaurs hanging around, maybe even goading you just to see if they can kill you for sport, that's not a good thing.
Well, yeah, but that's true for anything. If a bunch of 10 levels are trying to goad your characters.
Right.
First level should always think first and shoot later. They never do, but they should think.
Exactly. And especially considering the blood debt and the fact that your entire family pays the price if you are seen as doing something dishonorable, which is again a facet of Minotaur society that I think is interesting in exploring, but wouldn't want to live through.
Well, you have a ton of stuff to make available after 30 years of writing it. So you have plans beyond the game, modules, source books, anything like that, if you're successful, hopefully?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing that we're going to do is, and I think I can share this here, is as a Kickstarter bonus, we're going to have some professionally designed character sheets, for one of the tiers, and we're going to have an adventure to go through. The book itself is pretty big. I mean, these are two 110, 120 page books.
Wow.
Yeah. For an indie game, it's pretty darn big. Yes, I definitely have ideas on how to expand the world, how to get some adventures going. Probably more tips for GMs as opposed to modules themselves, because I think this is a great campaign game.
Cool. You mentioned conventions. Where can people find Clever Recluse here? You have a website, I believe. Yes.
Yes, I have a website. We have a website. It's a little out of date. I highly recommend. First of all, obviously following us on the Kickstarter. That definitely helps if you're on Kickstarter. Having more followers is a wonderful thing. I personally am always posting on X. We also have a Facebook.
Mm-hmm. Are you going to be any conventions coming up soon? We are going into the beginning of con season with spring just around the corner.
I can't say for sure. We're trying to nail down one convention, and definitely looking into more of them. If you're local to San Antonio, we're going to be featuring this at Dungeons of Drunks, which is the big role-playing game group that meets throughout San Antonio.
Oh, cool that you have an active role-playing game community.
Oh, San Antonio has a huge gaming community. It's wonderful.
I don't.
And they've been a big help. I got to say that. Thank you.
Congratulations. Congratulations for getting your Kickstarter. When does it go live?
Well, either February or March. It all depends. Right now, it is scheduled for February, but we may push it back to March. But one of those two, it's going to go live very soon.
All right. Yes. Cool. Awesome. So now, as of March, you and everybody listening to the sound of our voice can become a Minotaur. Awesome. At the end of every interview, I ask all my guests the same thing. So I'm going to ask you the same question. What is your wildest, weirdest, wackiest, laugh out loud tabletop role-playing game story? We all know mine. What's yours?
Wow. Oh man.
The one that always makes you laugh, you know?
Okay. Wow. I guess I kind of feel like I have to kind of talk about an I Am Minotaur playtesting thing that
Please
we
do.
did. Yeah. I was telling you guys about ship combat, and we had an elemental mage on board a ship, which is always dicey anyway, because they always lose their tempers and blow everything off the face of the earth. And he was all set to blow his temper, and I don't know if this is going to carry, because it was the first time I've talked about this. We had a priest Aphelios on board who was a necromancer, and he conjured up a zombie, and the elemental mage was about to lose his temper. The zombie kind of came shuffling towards him, and he just unleashed like tons on the zombie, which saved the ship. I mean, the zombie was just blown completely to smithereens. It was just an unbelievably ugly thing with that.
That saved the ship from the.
But he did save the ship. He did.
They were able.
He didn't kill any of the sailors. It was actually a good day.
Right. There's always plenty of more zombies. Yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cool.
So,
thank you very much. Anything else you'd like to say before I let you go?
No, I just want to thank everybody for listening, and I wanted to thank you for doing this. I really do appreciate it.
Hey, man, if I can help with my little teeny corner of the interweb, I'm happy to do it. And if you ever want to come back in again, just feel free to reach out to me. I've got nothing else to do with my life, so I'm always happy to make new friends out there in San Antonio or wherever. Hopefully we will see great things of your game traveling around the world. And a couple months from now, I expect to see you in the $1 Million Club, because I want everybody to be in the $1 Million Club on Kickstarter. All right. People can find him at Clever Recluse Games. Link down below. You can find the Kickstarter link down below. He's on X, as he said. So if you have any questions for Paul about what it's like to be a Minotaur in 2025 Earth, feel free to reach out to him. Till next time, I have been your guide to all tabletop role-playing game news, weather, and general internet nonsense, the ridiculousness that is the OGGM. Thanking you for sticking with me. Happy New Year. Stay safe out there. Get off my land.
Tell that you go screaming, fight, like a light, and the lights. Every now and then, fight, take the side, with the side, that you show in the escapade. That's the arcade, pixelated horror lesson, they unafraid. Karaoke screams, singing themes, heart and sleeves, anime dreams, pushing